They said the Duke of Ashbourne was heartless, a man carved from marble and bound by duty. Yet the night he cast out his bride beneath a storming sky, something inside him broke. Lady Evangeline stood trembling in the rain, her wedding gown heavy with mud and scorn, while the Tun whispered of her disgrace. But the Duke's nights grew darker. Whispers followed him even in sleep, her name, her vow, her weeping eyes. When his nightmares led him back to her cottage door, it wasn't forgiveness he sought, but redemption for a love he'd condemned before it could ever bloom. Ashbourne Manor glittered like a chalice of light. Candles burned in hundreds of silver sconces, their flames bending toward the mirrored walls that doubled every shimmer of crystal and every whisper of silk. Beneath the vaulted ceiling, violins wept softly, playing a waltz that seemed to hold its breath. The air smelled faintly of roses and rain, the fragrance of a night meant for joy. Lady Evangeline Morley stood before the altar, in a gown the color of moonlight, her gloved hands folded over a small posy of white violets. Her veil fell like spun glass down her shoulders, trembling faintly in the draught from the great doors. She did not notice the murmur at first. It began in the corner, a sound no louder than the brush of lace, and rippled outward through the gathered Tun. "The Duke has heard. Surely it cannot be true," someone hissed. "About her and the Marquis." The whispers floated like smoke toward the front pews where the Duke of Ashbourne stood. Tall, composed, the model of English nobility, he wore his composure as another man might wear armor. Only the slight tightening of his jaw betrayed the storm beneath. His gaze fixed on Evangeline, steady, searching, wounded. When the clergyman spoke, his words seemed to reach the Duke through fog. "Do you, your grace, take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife?" The silence between the question and the answer stretched, taut and perilous. Evangeline lifted her eyes, her heart swelling with unease. "Your grace?" she whispered, barely audible. The Duke's lips parted, but no vow came. Instead, a single word, cold, precise, irreversible. "No." A collective gasp rippled through the pews. The violins faltered and fell silent. Evangeline blinked once, twice, as though she had misheard him. "I beg your pardon," she murmured, her voice breaking through the stillness like porcelain cracking. The Duke's face had gone pale, his grey eyes glinting like steel. "You will not take my name," he said. "So you will not remain at Ashbourne another night?" "Alexander," she began, but he raised a hand. "Do not speak. Not here, not before them." His voice trembled only once, and she caught it, the ghost of the man she had loved flickering behind his fury. The clergyman stepped back, flustered, as the congregation murmured in confusion. The Marchioness of Kent hid her face behind her fan. Lord Pembroke's monocle slipped into his glass. Somewhere near the back a woman whispered, "He's heard of the letter. Oh God, the letter." Evangeline's pulse thundered in her ears. "There is no betrayal," she said softly, taking a step toward him. "You have been deceived, your grace. Whatever rumor has reached you—" "Rumor?" His tone cut like glass. "You think me a fool? A duke's bride exchanging secret words with another man the night before her vows." Color drained from her cheeks. "If you speak of the Marquis, he is my cousin by marriage. I wrote only to—" "Enough!" His voice echoed off the marble columns. "You have shamed me before the Tun, before the crown itself." The Dowager Duchess rose from her seat, pale as parchment. "Alexander, not here. Not tonight." But the Duke was beyond recall. He turned sharply toward the guests, his coat sweeping behind him like a shadow. "This union is annulled. Lady Evangeline is no longer welcome under my roof. Let every man and woman here remember it." A stunned hush fell over the room. Evangeline stood frozen, the world spinning around her in slow motion. The chandeliers blurred, the perfume and heat pressing close like a suffocating veil. Somewhere a violin string snapped, the sharp twang slicing the silence, and then clarity, a still aching clarity. She straightened, setting the violets down on the altar. "Very well," she said quietly. "Then I shall not trouble your grace further." She curtsied, low and perfect, her eyes lowered not from shame but from pride hard-earned. When she rose, her hands trembled, but her spine did not. The great doors opened with a groan, revealing the tempest outside. Rain lashed against the stone steps, lightning turning the night to silver. As she stepped into the storm, a murmur swept through the guests, half pity, half awe. "Evangeline," called a voice. It was Lady Kent, her friend. "Come back inside, you cannot—" But she did not turn. Outside, the wind tore at her veil, carrying it into the darkness like a ghost. Her gown clung to her body, heavy with rain, yet she walked as though she felt nothing. The carriage that had brought her stood waiting, the driver wide-eyed at the sight of her alone. "Home, my lady?" he asked timidly. She paused, gazing back at the manor, its windows burning with the golden light of wealth and betrayal. "No," she said softly, "not home. To anywhere the rain will wash this night away." As the wheels rolled into the darkness, thunder broke across the sky like applause. Inside Ashbourne's ballroom, the Duke stood motionless before the altar. The silence pressed against his chest like a stone. Through the stained glass window he watched her carriage disappear down the hill, swallowed by lightning and shadow. She was innocent, perhaps, his mother whispered behind him. He said nothing. Guilt bloomed slowly like blood beneath the skin. But pride was louder. Hours later the guests had departed, leaving only candle smoke and wilted flowers. The Duke paced the corridor outside the chapel, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. On the altar her violets lay abandoned, their petals bruised and glistening. He reached for them and hesitated. In his mind he saw her eyes again, the calm defiance beneath the hurt. For the first time he felt afraid. Not of scandal, of himself. At dawn the rain ceased. The manor smelled of damp silk and extinguished candles. The Duke retreated to his study, where a single letter lay unopened upon his desk. Evangeline's handwriting, delicate and sure. It had arrived the day before, sealed with her family crest. He broke the seal with trembling hands. "My dearest Alexander, I know the burden you carry and the shadow your title casts. Should the world ever make you doubt me, read this and remember. Love does not beg, it endures. Whatever comes, I am yours in truth, even if the world says otherwise." The words blurred before his eyes. He crushed the letter in his fist, unable to breathe. Somewhere beyond the window, a lone carriage rumbled away toward London. "God forgive me," he whispered. But no answer came, only the echo of her name in the rain. Evangeline's journey carried her through the drenched countryside, dawn turning the clouds to tarnished silver. Her hands, bare of jewels, now rested in her lap. She watched the fields pass, the first light touching the mist like a benediction. The humiliation of the night clung to her like a shroud, yet beneath it stirred something fierce, something resolute. They would whisper of her. Yes. The ton would dine on her disgrace for weeks, but she would not be their entertainment forever. She closed her eyes, breathing the cool air that smelled of earth and rain. "I will not live scorned," she murmured to herself. "I will live free." And in that vow, whispered to no one, her story began again. Far behind her, Ashbourne Manor loomed against the dawn, its towers stark and solitary. In one of its windows a light flickered, the Duke's chamber. He stood there still, staring at the horizon, haunted by the knowledge that he had banished not merely his bride, but the only peace he had ever known. The ton would not stay silent long. By nightfall, every ballroom from Mayfair to Bath would hum with whispers of the banished bride. And somewhere, amid the silken laughter and scandal, Evangeline's name would become legend. London had never been kind to the fallen. By the second week after the wedding, that was not. Every ballroom, salon and supper party of the ton thrummed with the same intoxicating scandal. The Duchess of Ashbourne, discarded before dawn. The phrase had become a kind of toast, repeated with feigned pity and secret delight. Fans fluttered like wings of gossip. Gloved hands cupped whispers, as if they held diamonds. The violins at Almack's played softer so the scandal could sing louder. She fainted right there at the altar, they say. No, she struck him, called him faithless. My dear, I heard she was caught writing to the Marquis himself the night before. Tragic, really, but one must question her breeding. And so Evangeline's name, once spoken with admiration, now floated through candlelit, halls like a perfume that lingered long after. Its wearer had gone. The Duke of Ashbourne heard none of these whispers. Directly, no one dared speak them in his presence, but their echo reached him nonetheless. It was in the lingering pauses when gentlemen rose from his table. It was in the strained politeness of ladies who once curtsied too deeply and now too briefly. It was even in the silence of his servants who moved quietly, avoiding his eyes. He pretended not to care. Pride was, after all, the weapon of the wounded. Each morning he rode through Hyde Park with the same impeccable grace, dark riding coat, gloves immaculate, hat tipped just so. And each morning he felt it, the faint prickle of eyes following him from passing carriages. "Your Grace," murmured his friend Lord Pembroke one afternoon as they paused near Rotten Row, "if I may, the tongue has a short memory, but not when silence feeds it. Might I suggest you show yourself at the Marquis of Haverford's opera box tonight? A public appearance could temper the talk." The Duke's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "Let them talk," he said curtly. "It is what they were born to do. But, Your Grace, I said let them." Yet that night, when he returned to Ashbourne House in Mayfair, the echo of those whispers followed him indoors. His study was lit only by the dying embers of the fire. Upon his desk lay the letter he had crushed days earlier, now smoothed out, the creases like scars upon the paper. It bore Evangeline's delicate script, her hand steady even in heartbreak. He read it again. "I write not to ask your mercy, Alexander, but to remind you that truth does not fade with reputation. You may withdraw your name, but you cannot erase the woman who bore it for 1 hour, with honesty if not blessing. I do not seek forgiveness, only freedom. May your nights be kinder than mine." He leaned back in his chair, the words burning through the armor of his composure. Freedom, the audacity of it. She should have begged for understanding, for reinstatement. Instead, she had written like a queen stripped of her crown who refused to bow. He stared at the letter until the ink seemed to move, the words shimmering in the candlelight. And for the first time since that storm-struck night, he wondered, what if he had been wrong? The city outside murmured with life, carriage wheels, rain against windows, laughter spilling from late-night salons. The Duke rose abruptly, shrugging into his cloak. If London wanted a spectacle, it would have one. At the Marquis of Haverford's opera box, the chandeliers glittered like captured stars. The air was thick with perfume and intrigue. Women reclined in silks of every hue. Gentlemen whispered into fans under the guise of gallantry. And at the centre of it all, Lord Haverford himself, charming, careless, and perhaps the source of the very rumour that had ruined a bride. "Your Grace," he drawled when the Duke entered. "London mourns your absence. I feared your heartbreak had sent you to Rome." "I do not run," the Duke replied coolly, removing his gloves one finger at a time. "Ah," said the Marquis, smiling faintly, "but hearts do." Their eyes met, polite, poisonous. From the stage below came the swell of violins. The soprano's voice rose, trembling with tragedy. And then he saw her. Across the gilded tiers of the opera house, a veiled figure sat in one of the lower boxes. The soft curve of her neck, the poise of her gloved hand resting against the balustrade. Something about her presence stilled him utterly. The world for a heartbeat lost its sound. He leaned forward, his chest tightening. "Could it be—" "Your Grace?" The Marquis's voice cut in, smooth as silk. "You seem distracted." The Duke did not answer. His gaze remained fixed on the veiled woman below. When she turned slightly, the lamplight caught the faintest glimmer of auburn hair escaping her mask. Evangeline. The name thundered in his mind, but she was supposed to be in Hampshire or abroad. Rumour had it she'd vanished entirely. And yet, the woman rose gracefully from her seat. A gentleman beside her, perhaps her escort, offered an arm. Together they moved toward the corridor that led to the masquerade supper rooms. The Duke's pulse quickened. Without a word he stood and followed. Micro cliffhanger, halfway point. The corridor behind the opera boxes was dimly lit, perfumed with lilacs and the faint scent of scandal. Guests passed in murmuring pairs, their laughter echoing down marble halls. The Duke moved among them like a shadow, his steps soundless, his eyes fixed on that single veiled figure ahead. She turned a corner toward the masquerade gallery, a place half hidden from view, where London's finest danced beneath mirrored ceilings, their identities safely concealed by masks. He reached the threshold just as the orchestra began another waltz. The crowd shimmered in motion, silver, sapphire, ivory, and there she was. The veiled lady stood alone at the edge of the floor, her hand brushing the railing. She looked not at him but out over the dancers, her posture serene, untouched by the world's venom. The Duke approached, heart hammering against his ribs. "My lady," he said quietly, bowing. "Forgive the intrusion, but may I claim the next dance?" She turned. The eyes behind the mask met his, calm, unflinching, heartbreakingly familiar. "Your Grace," she murmured, her voice cool as winter rain. "We are strangers now." "You forget yourself," he faltered. "Evangeline." But before he could speak further, she inclined her head. "Not here," she whispered. "Not yet," and she slipped away into the crowd. The Duke stood motionless, the music swelling around him. The masquerade blurred, masks, laughter, spinning gowns. His gaze swept the room again and again, but she was gone. Gone as she had been from his home, his life, his peace. He pressed a hand to his chest where her letter had rested earlier that evening. For the first time, he understood what the words had meant. Freedom, not forgiveness. Freedom for her. Torment for him. That night, long after the final curtain fell, London's gossip reached a fever pitch. She was seen at the opera. Impossible. She's in the country. Then who was the lady in sapphire who left before midnight? The Duke followed her, they say. Mercy. Perhaps she's returned to reclaim her name. And beneath the same silver dawn that had once banished her, the Duke stood at his window, sleepless, watching the rain wash the city clean. He did not yet know whether her return was real or imagined, only that his life had grown suddenly, unbearably silent without her voice to deny him. Somewhere in that silence, he swore he heard it, a whisper not of scandal, but of destiny. The hills of Hampshire rolled in soft shades of green and gold, the air scented with heather and wood smoke. To the villagers, the woman who had taken the ivy-covered cottage by the stream was known simply as Miss Morley. Few knew of her London past, and fewer dared to ask. They saw only a graceful young widow with a quiet voice, a silver cross at her throat, and eyes that seemed to look always towards some distant place. Evangeline had traded ballrooms for beeswax candles, gossip for birdsong. The world that had once dressed her in silk and envy now forgot her name entirely, which, to her surprise, brought a measure of peace. Each morning she opened the shutters herself, letting the pale sunlight fall across the writing desk by the window. There, beside a small vase of violets, she kept a stack of letters tied with blue ribbon, all addressed in her own hand, all to the Duke of Ashbourne. None had ever been sent. "Alexander, my heart condemns me for writing, yet my silence condemns me more. If pride is the cost of peace, I find I cannot afford it. You have my forgiveness, though you will never ask for it. You have my love, though you never wanted it." Each line had been written in a moment of weakness, and everyone folded away before it could betray her strength. Her housekeeper, Mrs. Hayward, a stooped, kind-eyed woman who had once served Evangeline's mother, brought tea to her window seat that afternoon. The fire hissed softly, rain whispering against the panes. "You write him again, my lady?" Mrs. Hayward asked gently, though she had promised not to pry. Evangeline smiled faintly. "A letter only to silence what I cannot say aloud." The old woman poured the tea. "Forgive me, but letters unsent grow heavy in the heart. Words not spoken can haunt a person worse than those shouted in anger." Evangeline turned the quill in her fingers. "I have no wish to haunt him, Mrs. Hayward. The Duke is quite capable of tormenting himself." Mrs. Hayward gave a low chuckle that faded into a sigh. "Even peace, my dear, can be broken by memory." Outside, the countryside breathed with the slow rhythm of early spring. Evangeline walked the fields after tea, her skirts brushing the wildflowers, the wind tugging playfully at her hair. The sun dipped behind a low ridge, bathing everything in amber light. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine she might yet belong somewhere, if not in his world, then in her own. But as she neared the gate, the sound of hooves shattered the calm. A rider approached along the muddy road, his cloak soaked, his horse lathered with foam. He bore the livery of Ashbourne. Evangeline's breath caught. The world seemed to tilt, the air thick with dread and disbelief. The rider dismounted swiftly and bowed. "Miss Morley," he said, his tone clipped but respectful, "I bear a message from His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne." She steadied herself on the gatepost. "His Grace," she repeated slowly, "has little reason to write to me." He held out a sealed parchment. The wax bore the Duke's crest, the lion rampant, pressed deep and unmistakable. She did not reach for it. "Is it a letter of apology?" she asked before she could stop herself. The messenger's eyes flickered. "No, my lady. It is a legal notice." The words struck colder than the rain. She took the document with trembling hands and stepped back into the cottage. The fire's glow seemed suddenly weak, as though wary of the seal she held. Mrs. Hayward hovered by the hearth. Concern furrowing her brow, Evangeline broke the wax and unfolded the letter. By order of the Crown Court of Chancery, all properties and inheritances connected to the Morley estate are hereby frozen, pending formal investigation and reassignment under the guardianship of His Grace, Alexander Vale, Duke of Ashbourne, as lawful executor. Her vision blurred. Guardianship? She whispered. He dares. Mrs. Hayward took the paper from her. My lady, this means he now controls every shilling in your name. Evangeline rose abruptly. He would strip me of dignity and of bread in one stroke. Why? Has he not taken enough? Perhaps he believes you owe him some debt. Evangeline laughed, low and bitter. Debt? The only debt between us is his, for love spurned, for a vow broken before God and witness. She pressed a hand to her temple. No, this cannot stand. Mrs. Hayward hesitated. What will you do? Evangeline looked toward the desk by the window. The half-written letters glowed softly in the firelight, the ink still wet on one of them. Slowly, deliberately, she tore it in half. I will write him another, she said, but this one he will read. That night sleep would not come. The cottage creaked softly under the wind, the rain a constant whisper on the roof. She sat at her desk, candlelight gilding her hair in gold and copper. Her quill hovered above the page. Your Grace, the messenger you sent arrived with your decree. I confess I did not expect to hear from you again, unless perhaps in conscience. Yet you send not remorse but retribution. Know this. Whatever fortune you seize from me cannot purchase back your honor nor my silence. You have taken all you can from my name, but you cannot govern my soul. Her hand trembled as she wrote, I was your bride for a single hour. You have been my ghost ever since. The clock struck midnight. She folded the letter, sealing it with plain wax. No crest, no pretense. Mrs. Hayward, she said softly when the old woman appeared at her door, wrapped in a shawl. This must go to London by first light. Are you certain, my dear? Evangeline's gaze was steady. Yes, he has summoned me to shame. I shall answer with truth. At dawn the messenger returned. Evangeline handed him the sealed letter without a word. The rain had stopped. The sky stretched pale and wide, washed clean. She watched from the threshold as he rode away, the road curling toward London like a question she could not yet answer. When he vanished beyond the ridge, she turned back inside. The cottage felt smaller now, fragile, borrowed, uncertain. Mrs. Hayward busied herself at the hearth, pretending calm. Whatever comes of it, child, you've done what's right. The truth must be spoken, even if it costs you peace. Evangeline looked toward the empty writing desk. Its surface scattered with torn letters, the unsent words of months now replaced by one that would fly straight into the heart of the man who had broken hers. She crossed to the window. The sunlight caught on a droplet still clinging to the glass, refracting into pale fire. Peace, she murmured. Perhaps peace was never meant to be silent, but that peace would not last. For even as her letter made its way to London, another horseman was already on the road, carrying a second decree under the Duke's seal, one that would force her to return to Ashbourne itself. And though she did not yet know it, the man who had cast her out was even now reading her words by candlelight, his hands shaking, his heart at war with his own command. Snow fell upon London like sifted lace, soft and soundless. The city glittered under frost and lamplight, its carriages moving like dark jewels across the cobblestones. Inside the grand townhouse of the Marchioness of Kent, the annual winter ball had begun, a night of whispered alliances, unveiled rivalries, and chandeliers that burned like 1,000 suns above the ton's most polished sins. Evangeline Morley, known tonight as Lady Araminta Vale of Kentmere, stepped through the gilded doors with her chin lifted and her heart steady. The false title, what graciously arranged by her friend the Marchioness, was her passport back into society. They lie of necessity, perhaps, but no greater than those spoken behind fans each night in this very hall. Her gown was sapphire silk, trimmed with silver embroidery that caught every flicker of light. A Venetian mask hid the delicate curve of her face, though nothing could disguise the poise that had once turned heads at her own wedding. The crowd paused to look, not because they recognized her, but because they felt her. Lady Araminta cooed a dowager as she passed. How refreshing, a face not yet jaded by our London circles. Evangeline smiled faintly. Give me time, madam. But behind the mirth her pulse thrummed like a violin string. Each glance, each whisper, seemed a mirror of another night, a ballroom, a vow, a breaking. The Marchioness swept to her side, radiant in ivory satin. "My dear, you must not linger at the door like a guest unsure of her welcome. You belong here, do I?" Evangeline's voice was soft but firm. "Belonging is a luxury bought with one's reputation, and mine was sold long ago." "Nonsense." The Marchioness took her hand warmly. "Those who gossip of sin are usually those who envy its courage." A delicate laugh escaped her. "You sound as if you've forgiven me already." "I never believed you guilty, Evangeline. I saw the truth in your eyes even when the tone did not." Before Evangeline could reply, the Marchioness's gaze flicked toward the grand staircase. "Ah, prepare yourself. He is here." The Duke of Ashbourne had arrived. He descended the staircase with the composure of a man carved from marble, every line of his bearing perfect, unyielding. The black of his coat was deep as midnight. The white of his cravat gleamed against his throat. Around him murmurs rippled like wind through silk. He inclined his head to no one, yet all bowed instinctively as he passed. Evangeline's breath caught, though she masked it behind her fan. 2 years of silence, and yet the mere sight of him felt like the reopening of a wound that had never healed. His eyes, that cool grey she once thought of as morning light, scanned the ballroom, expression unreadable. And then they found her. The world stilled. He did not falter, but something in his gaze changed. Recognition struck like lightning, shock, disbelief, and a flicker of something deeper, regret, perhaps, or remembrance. Evangeline turned away, feigning interest in the orchestra, though her pulse betrayed her calm. "Do not look at him," she murmured to herself. "He is not your ruin, unless you let him be. But fate, like gossip, does not yield to reason." Moments later she felt his presence beside her, a subtle shift in air, the faint scent of cedar and storm. "May I have this dance?" The voice was unmistakable. The musician struck a waltz, soft and slow. Without waiting for her reply, the Duke extended his hand, and propriety, that tyrant of appearances, left her little choice. She placed her gloved fingers in his, and for the first time since that night of betrayal, they touched. The ballroom blurred to golden shadow as they began to move. "You have changed," he said quietly. Women tend to when the world decides to destroy them. A muscle tightened in his jaw. "I did not wish it?" "No, but you permitted it." Their steps were flawless, their faces serene for the watching crowd. Only their voices, low and trembling beneath the music, betrayed the storm within. "I was deceived," he murmured. "The letter you wrote? I never saw it until months later. It was intercepted. By whom?" He hesitated. "By one who thought it mercy to spare me pain. I see now it was cruelty to us both." She looked up at him, searching for sincerity in the eyes that had once condemned her. "And now you would seek forgiveness?" "I seek peace." Their hands brushed, and in that instant, the years between them dissolved. The music swelled, the light dimmed. The entire ballroom seemed to fade, until there was only the rhythm of their steps and the ache of what might have been. He leaned closer, voice breaking the thin veil of formality. "I wronged you, not merely in judgment but in pride. I see it now each night when sleep denies me. You haunt me, Evangeline." Her breath trembled. "And do you imagine confession absolves you?" "No, but perhaps it reminds you that I am still human." The dance ended. Applause rippled like distant thunder, and the spell broke. Evangeline withdrew her hand, her composure flawless once more. "You are mistaken, Your Grace," she said softly. "I am no ghost. I am flesh, heart, and will, and I no longer exist for your absolution." Before he could answer, she turned and vanished into the sea of masks. Outside, the night air bit with frost. Evangeline stepped onto the terrace, her breath a pale mist against the winter dark. The city stretched below, rooftops dusted with snow, the distant hum of carriage wheels. She leaned against the balustrade, the cold seeping through her gloves but steadying her heart. He had spoken words she once longed to hear, yet now they rang hollow. Forgiveness? No. What she sought was something purer, freedom from the need to forgive. Behind her, the doors opened. The Duke's voice carried softly through the cold. "Evangeline," she did not turn. "I am not yours to summon any more." He hesitated. "I never wished to see you hurt. Yet you did." Silence. Only the faint hiss of snow falling on stone. Finally she turned to face him. His expression, once proud and distant, was stripped bare. a man undone by his own conscience. "I came to the ball tonight believing I could endure your absence," he said. "But seeing you, I realize absence was mercy compared to this." Her lips curved in a faint, sorrowful smile. "Then consider this night your punishment, your grace." He took a step forward, but she raised a hand. "Do not follow me. Some ghosts deserve their freedom." She walked past him, her sapphire gown brushing against his coat as she went. The faintest whisper of silk, the softest severing of what remained. As she re-entered the glittering hall, whispers trailed behind her. Not of scandal, but of fascination. The mysterious Lady Araminta had danced with the Duke of Ashbourne and left him standing in the cold. At the far end of the room, the Marchioness met her gaze with a knowing nod. Evangeline lifted her chin, feeling something within her shift, a quiet, blazing certainty. Forgiveness was not a gift granted to the guilty. It was the moment the wronged ceased to bow. Outside, unseen, the Duke stood on the terrace still, his breath turning to frost in the air, watching her silhouette fade among the candlelight, and as the orchestra began a new waltz, the crowd parted around her as though acknowledging a new power, one born not of title or marriage, but of survival. She smiled faintly, unafraid of the whispers now. Tomorrow they would give her another name. Tonight she reclaimed her own. The rain had become a language at Ashbourne Manor, steady, sorrowful, relentless. It beat against the tall windows, as if to echo the turmoil within its master's heart. In the long, sleepless hours between midnight and dawn, the Duke would wake with his chest heaving. The echo of a voice, her voice, still trembling through the darkness. "Alexander." He would rise from the bed, cold sweat on his brow, the dream fading but her image remaining. Her eyes not accusing but mournful, her lips parted as though to speak the forgiveness he could never ask aloud. Servants whispered now in the corridors. "His Grace walks the halls at night," murmured the footman to the cook. "Like a man pursued." "He does not dine," said another. "Does not speak. It is said he keeps a candle burning till morning." They were right. For every night the Duke sat before his desk, the room lit only by firelight and regret. The letter she had sent, sharp and trembling, the ink marked by controlled fury, lay folded beside his hand. He had read it until the paper grew soft at the creases. "You have taken all you can from my name, but you cannot govern my soul." Her words haunted him worse than the storm. That evening the clock struck 2. The wind clawed at the shutters, the rain whispering her name through every crack. The Duke dipped his pen into ink, though he did not yet know what he would say. "Evangeline, I do not ask you to remember me kindly, only to believe that I remember you truly. Sleep denies me peace, and in dreams I see again the night I cast you into the storm. If guilt could drown, I would have perished 100 times by now." He stopped. The words blurred. For once the act of writing felt both confession and punishment. He folded the letter, then fed it to the fire. The flames devoured it instantly. But before dawn he began another. "I am not mad, though they say I am haunted. Perhaps I am. You stand behind every closed door, in every reflection, in every dream. If love is sin, I am its willing penitent." Another letter. Another fire. Ashbourne's hearths burned all week. By the 7th night even the servants had begun to fear for him. His valet Wilkins found him in the library, the floor strewn with torn paper and extinguished candles. "Your Grace," the man said softly, "you've not slept in days." "The physician—" "Leave me," the Duke interrupted, voice hollow. "But, sir—" "The storm, then let it take me." Wilkins hesitated, then bowed and withdrew, closing the heavy door behind him. The Duke leaned back in his chair, staring into the fire. How easily he had spoken her ruin into existence, how swiftly he had condemned without question. And now he could not silence the echo of her leaving, the click of her heels, the soft rustle of her gown as she walked into the rain. Outside, lightning tore the sky in two. He rose, went to the window, and pressed his palm to the cold glass. In the reflection his face was a stranger's, lined by remorse, hollowed by sleeplessness. "If only she would curse me," he whispered to the storm. Anything but this silence. The storm gave no answer. Only the wind keened across the moors, lonely as a widow's cry. When dawn came, grey and reluctant, the Duke sat again at his desk. But this time he did not burn the letter. "My dearest Evangeline, the nights at Ashbourne are long and cruel. I once believed guilt to be the weight of conscience. I know now it is the absence of forgiveness. The house whispers your name, and I no longer know whether it is mercy or madness that keeps me breathing. If I am to die of this torment, let it be by truth, not silence. You once said peace was never meant to be silent. Then speak to me once more, and I shall let the ghosts rest. He sealed it with his crest and handed it to Wilkins without explanation. See that this reaches her. No delay. Yes, your grace. The road to Hampshire was long and treacherous with rain, but the messenger rode as ordered. Meanwhile the Duke, for the first time in months, slept and dreamed. He stood again in the ballroom, but it was empty, its chandeliers extinguished, its mirrors clouded. At the far end a figure in sapphire silk turned toward him. "Evangeline," he whispered. She smiled faintly, the smile of forgiveness, or farewell, and then faded like mist. He woke at dawn, breathless, uncertain whether he had been comforted or condemned. Miles away in her ivy-draped cottage, Evangeline was writing when the sound of hooves broke her concentration. Mrs. Hayward appeared at the door, cheeks flushed. "A messenger, my lady." "From London." Evangeline froze, the quill suspended mid-sentence. "From whom?" The old woman hesitated. "The seal bears the Lion of Ashbourne." For a long moment she could not move. Then silently she rose. The candle beside her flickered as she broke the wax. The paper trembled slightly in her hand. The handwriting was unmistakable, the ink blotched where his pen had lingered too long. She read the letter once, then again. The words, fractured, pleading, pulled her between fury and something far more dangerous, compassion. If I am to die of this torment, let it be by truth, not silence. The firelight warmed her face as she lowered the letter. Mrs. Hayward watched her carefully. "What does he say?" "That he dreams of me." The older woman crossed herself. "Dreams are fickle things. They make fools of saints and sinners both." Evangeline gave a fragile laugh. "Then I suppose we are both." She stood staring out the window at the pale horizon. The letter shook faintly in her hand. Could a heart once shattered still remember how to beat for the same man who had broken it? Could a wound so deep ever heal with words alone? She folded the letter slowly, pressing it against her lips as though to silence the tremor of emotion rising within. "I will not answer," she whispered. "Not yet." That night she placed the Duke's letter beside the ones she had once written and never sent. The candle burned low, casting their shadows together, two ghosts of ink and sorrow. Outside, the first thaw of spring began to melt the frost from her window, and though she did not yet know it, the same dawn that softened the snow in Hampshire also broke over Ashbourne, where a man knelt before the same firelight, waiting for an answer that might never come. But the silence that followed no longer felt like punishment. It felt like pause, as if fate itself were drawing breath before the next reckoning. The summons arrived on the first morning of spring, sealed in dark blue wax and stamped with the crest she had prayed never to see again. Evangeline held the letter for several minutes before breaking the seal. The parchment bore the Duke's familiar handwriting. No tremor, no flourish, simply command. By order of the estate solicitor, your presence is required at Ashbourne Manor to conclude matters concerning your dowry and inheritance. Your attendance is both lawful and expected. Beneath the formal tone, she could almost hear his voice, restrained, deliberate, and coldly polite. But between those words lingered something else, faint yet undeniable, the echo of the man who had once whispered her name like a vow. She folded the letter slowly, her fingers tightening until the wax cracked. "Mrs. Hayward," she said, her voice composed though her heart trembled, "prepare my things. I must return to Ashbourne." The old housekeeper stilled. "After all he's done, my lady, must you?" "Yes," Evangeline replied softly, looking toward the pale horizon. "Not for him. For what is mine?" The carriage rolled north for 2 long days beneath grey skies and the scent of rain. The countryside blurred past, fields awakening in green, rivers gleaming like threads of glass. Yet with every mile her calm thinned. By the time Ashbourne's iron gates loomed before her, her pulse was a storm beneath her ribs. The estate was as she remembered, vast, beautiful, and utterly desolate. The windows were shuttered. Ivy curled up the stone walls like the hands of time itself. The fountain before the entrance lay frozen still, its basin dry and cracked. A footman opened the carriage door and bowed. "Welcome to Ashbourne, my lady." The title struck her like a cruel jest. She stepped down, gathering her skirts against the wind. Inside, the air was colder still, scented faintly of dust and candle wax. Portraits once radiant in gold frames were now draped in black cloth. Only one remained uncovered, her own painted the year before their wedding, the likeness of a woman who still believed in forever. She turned away. He was waiting in the great hall. The Duke of Ashbourne, Alexander Vale, stood at the foot of the staircase, tall yet diminished, his face drawn and pale as marble. His eyes, once sharp with judgment, now carried the weight of too many sleepless nights. "Evangeline," he said quietly. Her name in his voice struck like a chord plucked from memory. "Your Grace." She inclined her head. "Every inch the composed lady. I came as your solicitor requested." He took a hesitant step forward, but she did not move. The distance between them felt sacred, a boundary forged by pain and pride. "You must think me cruel to summon you," he said at last. "I would not have done so were it not required." "I have thought you many things," she replied, "cruel among them, but never required." A flicker of hurt crossed his features. "You won't me still?" "I merely returned the courtesy." Silence fell. Only the ticking of the great clock marked the moment's passing. At last he gestured toward his study. "Will you sit?" "I have kept the fire for you." Her lips curved faintly. "How gallant, to offer warmth after the storm you cast me into." But she followed him nevertheless. The study was dimly lit, the scent of old books and rain-soaked wood heavy in the air. A single fire burned low, its glow trembling against the walls. On his desk lay stacks of papers, deeds, letters, and an unopened envelope with her name upon it. He motioned toward a chair near the hearth. She remained standing. "Let us speak plainly, Your Grace," she said. "You summoned me concerning my dowry. I am prepared to sign whatever document restores what is rightfully mine." He clasped his hands behind his back, staring into the fire. "I intended to return it, truly. Then why the delay?" "Because—" He turned toward her, his voice low, unsteady. "Because I feared it would mean I had lost you entirely," her breath caught. "You lost me the moment you chose pride over truth." "Yes," he murmured, eyes darkening. "And I have paid for it every night since." The wind howled against the window panes, rattling them like bones. He stepped closer, his expression raw. "Do you know what it is to wake and feel the air thicken because she is not beside you? To hear her voice in every storm?" Evangeline met his gaze without flinching. "You speak as though torment were virtue. Do not mistake regret for love, Alexander." Her use of his name broke something in him. "Then what must I say, Evangeline?" "That I am sorry, that I would undo the hour I shamed you before God and the world if I could." "Say nothing. Words cannot rebuild what you burned." He took another step, and for a moment the years fell away. Two souls caught in the quiet gravity of all that might have been. "Would you have me on my knees?" He whispered. "No," she said softly. "Stand, Your Grace, and look at what your pride has cost you." The firelight trembled between them, a living witness to their ruin. He turned to the desk, pulling a folded document from beneath the papers. "Your dowry is here. I have signed it. It is yours." She reached out, her fingers brushing the parchment, but he did not release it. "I meant to give it," he said, voice breaking. "But I cannot let you leave again." Her eyes widened. "You presume to hold me still?" "I would hold the chance to atone," he said. "I would ask only for 1 hour to speak, to explain what I could not then." Her hand trembled, fury rising like heat in her chest. "Explain? You made me a scandal. You let London laugh while I buried my name in silence. What explanation could cleanse that?" He swallowed hard. "None, but perhaps forgiveness might." Her laugh was sharp and sorrowful. "Forgiveness? You mistake me for the woman you destroyed." She snatched the deed from his grasp, her composure shattering at last. "You cannot own me twice, Alexander. Not in name, not in mercy." Outside, thunder cracked. The first drops of rain began to strike the glass. Evangeline turned toward the door, her gown sweeping the floor like a wave in retreat. "Evangeline, wait!" But she did not. She fled down the corridor, through the echoing hall, and into the storm beyond. Rain struck her face, cold and sharp. The world blurred around her, the statues, the stone steps, the sky roaring above. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard him calling her name again. The sound swallowed by the wind. She stopped at the edge of the courtyard, breathless, her pulse matching the thunder's rhythm. Behind her the manor loomed, dark, vast, and aching with memory. She pressed the deed to her chest and whispered to the night, This time I leave on my own terms. Lightning flashed, illuminating the path ahead, and for the first time since her exile, she felt something close to power. She turned toward the carriage waiting by the gate, unaware that from the window above the Duke watched her go, his hand pressed against the glass, his face pale as the lightning itself. The storm did not end that night, nor did his longing, and though she told herself she would never return, the road between them, lined with silence, pride, and unfinished letters, was not yet closed. The night of the winter gala at the Royal Opera House arrived draped in velvet skies and scandal's perfume. The streets shimmered with carriage lamps, their golden halos reflected in the slick cobblestones. Inside, the opera was ablaze with candlelight and gossip, the ton assembled in full splendor, every eye glittering with curiosity and cruelty in equal measure. And at the center of that glittering hive of whispers sat Lady Evangeline Morley, or as society now murmured, the fallen Duchess resurrected. She was radiant in ivory and gold, her gown stitched with pearls that caught the light like tears held in defiance. At her side, the Marquis of Kent inclined his head to her as the orchestra began to play. He was elegant, charming, dangerously attentive, the kind of man who could restore a reputation merely by escorting it into public view. The crowd noticed. "She returns with the Marquis," a lady whispered behind her fan. "Bolder than ever," another replied. "How exquisite revenge must look in silk." Evangeline heard them, of course. She always heard. But tonight she was steel-wrapped in grace. From his private box above the gilded tiers, the Duke of Ashbourne watched in silence. For a man who had mastered composure, the sight below struck like a blade between the ribs. He had thought himself beyond jealousy, too noble for such a common affliction. Yet as he saw Evangeline lean slightly toward the Marquis, laughing at something unheard, the air left his lungs. She had never laughed so freely with him. Wilkins, his valet, shifted uneasily behind him. "Your Grace, perhaps it would be wise to depart before the interval. The company below—" "Be silent," the Duke cut in, his gaze never leaving her. "I will depart when I am dismissed from my own conscience, not before." He lifted the opera glass again. Even from across the room, he could see the faint shimmer of her earrings, the same pair he had given her on the eve of their betrothal. She had not pawned them nor thrown them away. That small mercy stirred something reckless in him. Below, the soprano's voice rose in a crescendo so pure it seemed to pierce the heart itself. And as the final note trembled through the air, Evangeline's gaze, as if guided by invisible thread, lifted to the Duke's box. Their eyes met. For a long, dangerous moment, neither looked away. The audience erupted in applause, but the sound reached neither of them. Time had narrowed to the width of a breath. "He rose, Your Grace," Wilkins whispered sharply. "To descend now would be madness," the Duke finished. "Yes, and yet—" Before reason could intercede, he was already moving. The crowd parted as he descended the grand staircase, each step echoing like the toll of a clock counting down to ruin. Fans fluttered. Murmurs swelled. The Marchioness of Kent, seated nearby, turned pale as moonlight. The Marquis looked up, startled, as the Duke crossed the marble floor. Evangeline stood as he approached. Her gloved hand trembled against her fan, not from fear but from the sheer, unbearable knowledge that he had come for her. "Your Grace," said the Marquis, his tone sharp with warning, but the Duke did not look at him. His eyes belonged to her alone. He stopped before her, the world fading to a hush. Candlelight trembled across his face, revealing a man stripped of armor and grace. Only raw, aching humanity remained. "You are not forgotten," he said softly. Though every word seemed to burn him, the silence that followed was exquisite, the kind that could ruin reputations or resurrect them. Every ear strained, every heart waited. Evangeline's expression did not falter, but her breath caught once, almost imperceptibly. Then, steady as a queen, she answered, "Nor forgiven." Gasps rippled through the audience. The Marquis's jaw tightened, his hand flexing at his side. But Evangeline did not yield. She met the Duke's gaze until the orchestra began again, the music swelling like waves between them. And then, with perfect composure, she turned away. The Duke stood frozen, the world a blur of velvet and murmurs. When he finally turned back toward the staircase, the eyes of London followed him, some in pity, others in satisfaction. In his box above, the candlelight had begun to gutter. "Your Grace," Wilkins said quietly when he returned, "you have given them a tale to feast on for years." "I know," he replied, sinking into his seat. "Let them feast. I have starved long enough." Below, Evangeline's heart pounded like the strings of the orchestra. Her fingers dug into her fan until it cracked, the faint sound lost beneath the applause. The Marquis leaned closer. "You have made him the scandal he once made you. A fair exchange, is it not?" Her eyes remained fixed on the stage. "No," she said softly. "There is no fairness in ruin. Only consequence." He studied her for a long moment. "Do you still love him?" She turned to meet his gaze, the ghost of a smile upon her lips. "That, my lord, is the only question I refuse to answer, even to myself." Later that night, the carriages lined the street like shadows, and the city breathed in the aftermath of gossip. In the privacy of her own carriage, Evangeline sat silent. The city's lamps flickered past her window, gilding her face in gold and grey. She touched the pearls at her throat, those symbols of a promise broken and unforgotten. His words had not been an apology, nor even a plea. They were something deeper, quieter, a confession made not to her forgiveness, but to his own damnation. And yet, for the first time in years, she had seen his eyes not cold with pride, but hollow with need. Mrs. Hayward's warning echoed faintly in her memory. Even peace can be broken by memory. Perhaps memory had never left at all. Across the city, the Duke sat alone in his study, the storm outside matching the one within. The firelight flickered over a familiar object on his desk, a program from the night's performance. Her name was scrawled upon it in trembling ink. He stared at the word until it blurred. Then, with a broken breath, he folded the paper and placed it in the same drawer that held her letters. "Not forgotten," he murmured to the silence. "Not forgiven, but perhaps not lost." He poured himself a glass of brandy and turned toward the window. The rain streaked the glass, warping the lights of the city below. Somewhere out there she was returning home, perhaps trembling too, though she would never let him see it. In her carriage, Evangeline's hand found the edge of her fan, cracked in two. She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "To forgive is to surrender," she whispered to the dark, "and I have surrendered enough." But her reflection in the glass seemed unconvinced. Outside, thunder rolled across the London rooftops, a low, steady promise that the storm between them had only just begun. The hour before dawn held a peculiar stillness, the kind that hums with expectation. London slept beneath a pale grey mist, unaware that its morning would birth a scandal whispered in every drawing-room by nightfall. In the secluded gardens of the Kent estate, two men faced one another, not with pistols but with pride. The Duke of Ashbourne stood rigid, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his breath misting in the chill air. Opposite him, the Marquis of Kent, elegant even in anger, rested a hand upon his cane and met his rival's gaze with cool precision. "Your Grace," the Marquis said at last, his tone sharp but measured, "I trust this confrontation has purpose, for I am not in the habit of entertaining ghosts." The Duke's jaw tightened. "You think me a ghost, Kent?" His voice was low, dangerous in its calm. "Then perhaps you have mistaken which of us lingers in another man's shadow." The Marquis's lips curved faintly. "And yet it is you who summoned me here at this ungodly hour to speak of her. Tell me, do you seek satisfaction or confession?" "Neither," said the Duke, "only truth." The wind stirred the frost upon the hedges. Dawn crept slowly over the horizon, painting the world in silver and ash. "You think her heart is yours?" The Duke continued, his words cutting through the quiet. "You flaunt your attentions before society as if affection were currency to be displayed." "I offer her respect," the Marquis replied coolly. "Something you forfeited when you cast her to ruin." A shadow crossed the Duke's face. "You dare speak of honor when you profited from her disgrace, when you paraded her name to provoke mine." The Marquis's eyes hardened. "You believe all affection is transaction, all loyalty conditional upon forgiveness. But some men value a woman for her spirit, not her scandal." For a moment the Duke faltered, his breath visible in the cold air. "And you?" he said quietly. "Would you marry her to spite me? Or to save her? Does it matter?" The Marquis replied. "Either way I would cherish her." Their words struck like blades, each one more wounding than the last. The Duke's temper, long mastered, began to crack. "You speak of cherishing. he said through his teeth. Yet you circle her name like a vulture. You call it protection. I call it possession. The Marquis's voice dropped to a dangerous softness. And what would you call what you did to her? The Duke turned away briefly, his gloved hand trembling at his side. A sin I will repent for the rest of my days. The Marquis exhaled, his anger cooling into something almost pitying. Then perhaps your repentance might begin with letting her live unchained by your memory. The Duke's head snapped up. Do you think I can simply forget her? I think, said the Marquis, that you must. They stood in silence, the rising sun drawing faint light between them. Two men divided by pride, yet bound by the same wound. A woman's absence, then from behind them, a soft voice broke the air. Gentlemen, both turned. Evangeline stood at the entrance to the garden path, wrapped in a dove-grey cloak, her hair glinting faintly with the gold of dawn. How long she had been listening neither could tell, but the serenity of her expression belied the storm within her eyes. Is this what my name is worth? She asked quietly. A pretext for men's vanity. Hi, Evangeline, the Duke began, stepping forward. You should not be here, yet here I am. Her gaze cut through him. You speak of me as if I were a prize to be defended, a debt to be repaid, or a wound to be avenged. Do neither of you see? I am not yours to quarrel over. The Marquis lowered his head slightly. We meant no insult, my lady. No? Her tone sharpened. You meet at dawn to measure words like swords, to claim virtue through my name and call it honor. You would both cage me in memory, one through guilt, the other through gallantry. But I am neither a sin nor a salvation. I am a choice, idem mine alone. Her words struck with more force than any pistol shot. For a moment neither man spoke. The Duke looked as though the ground had opened beneath him. The Marquis's composure fractured into something resembling shame. Evangeline stepped forward, the morning light catching the edge of her cloak. You cannot duel for what you never owned, she said softly. And you cannot save what does not need saving. She turned to the Marquis first. My lord, I thank you for your kindness, but do not mistake my gratitude for permission. I will not be shielded from whispers by the arm of another man. Then to the Duke. And you, Alexander, you summoned ghosts, but I am no longer one of them. The woman you cast into the storm is gone. The one before you stands of her own making. The Duke's lips parted, but no sound came. He bowed his head instead, slowly, deeply, a gesture both apology and surrender. The Marquis followed suit, his pride silenced by her grace. Above them, the first full light of morning broke across the gardens, spilling gold over frost and regret alike. Evangeline drew a slow breath, the chill air stinging her lungs. Let the tongue whisper what it will, she said at last. I am weary of living by its mercy. And with that she turned and began to walk away, her figure receding into the misted light. Not as the discarded Duchess of Ashbourne, but as a woman reborn from ruin. The two men remained standing long after she disappeared from view. The Duke was the first to speak. You see now, he said quietly, why neither of us deserves her. The Marquis's gaze followed the distant line of the road. Deserve her? He murmured. We are not meant to. We are meant to remember her, and be made better for having failed her. The Duke's eyes closed, the truth of it settling like winter in his bones. By noon the story had spread. Did you hear? Whispered the ladies at Almack's. The Duke and the Marquis nearly duelled at dawn. For her? Gasped another. And she stopped them with words alone. They say she spoke of choice and of freedom. How unthinkably modern, how exquisitely divine. Evangeline's name, once tarnished by scandal, now shimmered in every whisper like redemption draped in silk. And somewhere in the countryside, where spring would soon thaw the frost, her carriage rolled onward, toward a future that was hers. And hers alone. For the first time she smiled without hesitation. The silence that followed was not emptiness, but peace. Yet even peace, she would soon learn, has a way of being tested. For as she journeyed home, a messenger rode fast behind her, bearing news from Ashbourne.news that would draw her back once more to the house she had sworn never to enter again. The storm that swept across Derbyshire that week was not of thunder but of illness. The servants whispered of it first, of the Duke's fever that no tonic could ease, of his restless nights and ghosted cries that rattled through the great halls of Ashbourne Manor, like echoes from another world. Candles burned through the night at every window, The doctor came twice a day and left each time with a heavier expression. Soon even the housemaids crossed themselves when they passed the Duke's chamber door. "It is as though he is haunted," murmured Mrs. Porter, the housekeeper. "He calls her name, again and again." And in Hampshire, Evangeline heard. The letter arrived at dusk, its seal trembling from haste rather than wax. She broke it open with trembling hands. "Your Grace is taken gravely ill. He calls for you by name. The physician fears the worst. If you would see him once more, come before the dawn." She read it twice, unable to breathe. The ink blurred. Her hand trembled. Mrs. Hayward, watching from the fire, said softly, "You owe him nothing, my lady." Evangeline folded the letter and pressed it against her heart. "No," she whispered. "But I owe myself the peace of knowing he does not die alone." The road to Ashbourne was washed in rain. Her carriage wheels sank into the mire, the horses' hooves striking sparks of mud against the lantern light. Outside, lightning flickered across the moors, white veins tearing through the darkness. When at last the great manor loomed from the mist, it seemed less a house than a monument of grief. The windows were dim. The gates hung half open. Inside, the air was heavy with sickness and candle smoke. "Lady Evangeline," Mrs. Porter breathed in astonishment, curtsying deeply. "You came?" "Take me to him," she said simply. They climbed the grand staircase, their footsteps echoing softly against the marble. The portrait gallery stood in shadow, the faces of the Vale ancestors hidden beneath mourning cloths. Only one painting remained uncovered, hers, the Duchess of Ashbourne, captured in her first bloom of love. She paused, her fingers brushing the dust along the frame. "How cruel," she murmured. "That memory survives where affection does not." The Duke's chamber was dim and stifled, its curtains drawn against the storm. A single lamp flickered beside the bed, where Alexander Vale lay pale and still beneath linen sheets damp with sweat. The proud lines of his face had softened into fragility. His lips moved faintly, whispering words that barely reached her. "Evangeline." Her name breathed like a prayer. She moved closer, her heart a knot of confusion and pity. "I am here," she said quietly. His eyes opened, unfocused, fever-bright. "Is it you? Or the dream again?" "It is I." She sank to the chair beside him. "You must rest," he smiled faintly. "Rest eludes those who deserve it least. Then I shall stay until it finds you." He reached weakly for her hand and she hesitated, then let him take it. His palm burned with fever, yet his grasp trembled with gratitude. "I feared I would go without seeing your face once more," he whispered. "You should not have sent for me. I did not." "My conscience did." Hours passed. The storm outside deepened. The curtains billowed softly in the wind that slipped through the cracks. The fire guttered low. Evangeline sat silently, watching his chest rise and fall, each breath an uncertain promise. The man before her was not the tyrant of memory, nor the figure of gossip. He was simply human, fallible, fragile, and afraid. In his delirium he murmured fragments of confession. "The rain." "You walked away." "I let you go. Forgive me." Her throat tightened. She had imagined hearing those words 100 times, always with triumph. Yet now they brought only sorrow. Near dawn his fever broke into shivering fits. She called the physician, who tended him swiftly, muttering assurances she barely heard. When at last he left them alone again, the Duke's breathing had steadied, his lashes damp against his cheeks. Evangeline remained by his side. When he stirred again, his voice was clearer. "Why do you weep?" "I do not," she lied. He smiled weakly. "Then it must be the candlelight trembling." She looked away. "You speak as though your illness were poetry." "It feels like penance. Perhaps it is." He turned his head slightly toward her. "Tell me, Evangeline, do you hate me still?" Her answer came after a long silence. "Hate, no, hatred is for equals. What remains is grief and pity." He flinched at the word as though struck. "Pity is the cruelest form of mercy." "Then take it for what it is," she said softly. "A mercy undeserved but freely given." His eyes glistened with tears, rare, unguarded, genuine. "Forgive me," he whispered, "not for love's sake but for peace. Let me leave this world knowing I have wronged you once, and that you have forgiven me once." She bowed her head, tears falling silently onto their joined hands. "You wronged me 1,000 ways, Alexander. But if forgiveness will set you free, then I give it." He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, his face softened into serenity. The storm outside faltered, the rain thinning to a gentle patter. The first light of morning crept through the curtains, pale and merciful. Evangeline rose, intending to leave before he woke again. But as she reached the door, his voice, weak but steady, stopped her. "Stay." She turned. "Stay," he repeated. "Not for pity, but for what was real between us. Do you not remember? There was love once, before the world intruded." Her eyes met his, eyes grey to gold. "I wounded, to weary, I remember," she said. "Then let this not be our ending." She stood in silence, her heart divided between the past that had broken her and the peace that might yet redeem them both. When she finally answered, her voice trembled with truth. "I will stay until the light returns." The storm passed by noon, leaving the gardens washed and glistening. The house grew quiet again, filled not with sorrow but with the hush of reprieve. Evangeline sat by the window, watching the sunlight creep over the drenched roses below. Behind her the Duke slept, no longer haunted, only human, and as the bells of Ashbourne Chapel tolled softly in the distance, she realized that forgiveness, once given, does not belong to the forgiven alone. It frees the heart that grants it. Yet peace, she knew, was never permanent. For though the fever had passed, a letter awaited her downstairs, bearing the royal seal. Its contents would summon her once more into the world she had fled, and into a choice that would define not just her heart, but her destiny. Spring came quietly to Ashbourne, the way grace enters a soul, without trumpet or demand, only light. The long winter that had weighed upon the manor seemed to lift with the first bloom of wisteria along the southern terrace. The fountains sang again, the marble steps gleamed after months of rain, and the air carried the scent of lilac and thawed earth. Evangeline walked through the gardens in the early dawn, her skirts brushing the dew. The years had gentled her beauty into something finer, serenity rather than brilliance, strength rather than pride. She paused beneath the willow tree, where the morning sun caught in the threads of her shawl, turning the fabric to spun gold. Behind her the sound of footsteps, slow, measured, familiar, stirred the air. "You rise with the sun now," came Alexander's voice, soft but sure. "Ashbourne has missed its mistress's company in the dawn hours." She turned, smiling faintly. "The gardens needed tending. And so perhaps did I." The Duke approached, dressed not in formal black but in a simple waistcoat the color of pale sand. Illness had thinned him, but the pallor of fever had given way to a quieter strength. He looked at her with the kind of reverence born not of worship, but understanding, as if seeing her, truly for the first time. "Do you recall," she said, glancing toward the chapel beyond the hedges, "how these very gardens once felt like a prison?" He nodded. "I recall how I built their walls with my own pride, and how I mistook escape for freedom," she murmured. Perhaps neither of us understood what the word meant. They walked together along the gravel path, the morning quiet save for the soft trill of larks. The tongue's chatter had finally grown weary of their tale. What had once been scandal was now legend. The banished bride who returned, whispered as though it were poetry rather than pain. Yet here, in the privacy of the dawn, neither cared for rumor nor redemption. At the chapel door he paused. "There is something I must show you," he said, his voice hesitant, almost shy. She arched an eyebrow. "Another letter?" "No," he smiled, "a promise." He opened the chapel door. Inside, sunlight streamed through newly cleaned stained glass. The same altar. The same stone floor where humiliation had once bloomed like poison. Yet now white lilies filled the aisles. A faint scent of beeswax and rosewater lingered in the air. Evangeline stood still, her hand rising to her throat. "You restored it. I rebuilt it," he corrected gently. "But I did not cleanse its memory. That cannot be done. We can only walk through it." Her eyes softened. "And why bring me here?" "Because I would walk through it again, but beside you this time." He stepped forward, taking her hand. No priest, no guests, no titles, only truth. The tremor in his voice was not weakness, but reverence. "I thought vows spoken before witnesses would make them sacred," he said. "But I learned holiness is born only in honesty." She drew a slow breath. "And what would you vow now, Alexander Vale?" He looked into her eyes, and the years between them seemed to dissolve. "To cherish you not as penance but as peace, to listen when silence feels easier, to honor your freedom as the truest measure of my love." Her lips trembled. "You once called me your duchess," she said, "and I believed that was all I could be. But I found myself again, and apart from that name, apart from you. And now, she stepped closer, her fingers brushing his. Now I choose to stand with you, not as duchess nor wife by law, but as the woman I became when I forgave you. For a long moment, they said nothing. The chapel held its breath. He reached into his coat and drew out a small ring. Simple gold, not the ornate heirloom that had once sealed their first union. The band glimmered faintly in the morning light. It belonged to my mother, he said. She wore it before titles, before duty. I wish to give it to you not as a duke to his duchess, but as a man to the woman who taught him what forgiveness truly is. Evangeline smiled through tears. And what is that, my lord? Forgiveness, he whispered, sliding the ring onto her finger, is love that has learned to breathe again. Her hand trembled in his, and for the first time since that fateful wedding day, she did not tremble from fear or fury, but from peace. Outside, the bells of Ashbourne Chapel began to chime the hour, their sound soft and resonant, carrying across the fields like benediction. She closed her eyes and leaned her forehead against his. Freedom, she murmured, was never leaving you. It was finding myself first. His answer came as a breath against her skin, and finding you again made me free. The sunlight poured through the stained glass, painting them in fragments of color, blue, gold, crimson, like two souls remade by light. When they stepped out into the garden once more, the world seemed utterly still. The tulips bowed in the breeze, the fountain glistened like crystal, and the scent of lilac rose warm in the air. The servants who passed bowed quietly, but the pair walked on hand in hand as equals. Do you suppose, he asked, smiling faintly, that they will still speak of us? Perhaps, she said, but let them. Stories have a way of changing in the telling. Let ours end as one of peace. That night the Duke lit the final fire of winter. The wind outside carried the song of distant bells, the same ones that had tolled on their wedding day. Now softer, gentler. Evangeline sat beside him, a book open on her lap, though neither read. I used to dream, he said quietly, that you stood beyond my reach no matter how far I walked. Now you are here, and I fear waking. She smiled, resting her hand over his. Then do not wake, Alexander. Let the world move as it will. We have earned our quiet. He kissed her hand, his lips lingering against her skin, not with desire, but with reverence. And for the first time, Ashbourne felt like home again. Years later, when travellers passed through Derbyshire, they spoke of the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne not as scandal, but as legend. They said the manor smelled of roses even in winter, and that laughter, once absent, now echoed from its halls. Some said forgiveness had made the walls bloom again. Others said love had simply remembered its way home. But for those who knew them, the servants, the neighbours, the few who still whispered their names with tenderness, it was simpler than that. It was the story of two souls who had once lost each other in pride, and found one another again in grace. And though time would one day dim the brilliance of their names, the garden where they walked each morning would remain, bright with wisteria, golden with light, eternal in its silence and its peace.